On a single morning in October 1307, the most powerful bank in Europe was arrested. Not robbed, not bankrupted, arrested. Its members dragged from their houses in chains across an entire kingdom in a coordinated strike ordered by a king who owed them a fortune. The bank was a religious order. Its bankers were warrior monks who had sworn individually to own nothing. And in less than 200 years, they had gone from 9 knights guarding a road to Jerusalem to holding the treasure of kings, moving money across a continent, and lending to the most powerful crowns on earth. This is the story of how monks with swords built the world's first international bank, and how that bank became so powerful it had to be destroyed. To feel how strange the ending is, you have to see how humble the beginning was. In the year 1119, roughly 2 decades after the First Crusade had seized Jerusalem, the roads of the Holy Land were a graveyard. Pilgrims arriving from Europe, unarmed, exhausted, often carrying everything they owned, were being robbed and killed by the hundreds on the route from the coast up to the Holy City. There was no army to guard them. The Crusader kingdoms were thin, stretched, and broke. So a French knight named Hugh de Payne, along with a small band of companions, the traditional number is 9, went to the king of Jerusalem and proposed something new. They would take monastic vows, poverty, chastity, obedience. But instead of retreating to a monastery to pray, they would take up arms and protect the pilgrim roads. A monk who fought, a soldier who prayed. The two things medieval Europe thought could never be combined. The king gave them quarters in a wing of the royal palace, built on the site believed to be the Temple of Solomon. From that address they took their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The Knights of the Temple, the Templars. And in the beginning, poor was not a pose. Their earliest seal shows 2 knights riding a single horse, an image meant to say plainly that the order was so poor 2 brothers had to share one mount. These were not financiers. They were a tiny, obscure charity with weapons. But an idea was about to attach itself to them that would change everything. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes in France, the Church gave the order its official blessing and a formal rule of life, a rule shaped with the help of one of the most influential churchmen of the age, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard then wrote a letter promoting the new order, praising these warrior monks as a new kind of knighthood fighting for God. With the Church's endorsement, something remarkable happened. Across Europe, noble families began donating land, money, entire estates to this holy order of fighting monks. A knight joining the Templars would often give the order everything he owned. Donations poured in from England, France, Spain, Italy, the German lands. Within a generation, the order that began by sharing a single horse controlled property on a scale that would soon rival kingdoms. And here is the piece most people miss. Only a fraction of the men who wore the Templar cross were knights swinging swords in the Holy Land. The vast majority stayed in Europe, running the order's estates, farms, mills, vineyards, granaries, and townhouses spread across every Christian kingdom. Every donated manor became a working business. Every business threw off a surplus. And all of that surplus flowed back into a single, disciplined, centrally organized institution. The Templars were not just an army, they were, quietly, one of the largest agricultural and commercial enterprises in Europe, with a network of local branches already in place in almost every region that mattered. Hold that image, because it is the hidden skeleton of a bank, a trusted brand. A presence in every kingdom, a steady income, and a central organization able to move value between its own houses. All the Templars needed now was permission to operate above the rules that bound everyone else. The Templars had wealth now. What they needed next was a legal position that would let them do something with it that no one else in Christendom could. And in 1139, the Pope handed them exactly that. In Episode 1, we said the Templars could charge fees on moving money because they answered directly to the Pope, not to local bishops. That single sentence deserves an entire chapter, because it is the master key to everything the Templars became. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a papal bull called Omne Datum Optimum, every good gift. On paper, it was a grant of privileges to a favored religious order. In practice, it was one of the most extraordinary legal charters in medieval history. It did three things that, taken together, built a bank. First, it made the Templars exempt from tithes, the tax the church levied on nearly everyone. Not only did they not have to pay tithes, in many cases, they could collect them. Money flowed toward the order and was not clawed back. Second, it exempted them from taxes and secular authority. The great abbeys and bishoprics of Europe answered to local powers: a king, a duke, a bishop. The Templars answered to none of them. And third, the decisive stroke, it placed the entire order under the direct and sole authority of the Pope himself. No bishop could excommunicate a Templar. No local prelate could sit in judgment over the order. No king could tax them, and no church court beneath Rome could touch them. They were, in the fullest sense the medieval world could imagine, untouchable, answerable only to a single man hundreds of miles away in Rome, who was usually their patron. Now connect this to everything episodes 1 and 2 established. The whole medieval financial system ran on a wall. Usury, lending money at interest, was a mortal sin, condemned by council after council. Every merchant, every monastery, every lender in Christendom had to build careful legal fictions to route around that wall, always watching for a local bishop who might rule against them. The Templars did not have that problem. There was no local bishop who could rule against them. There was no church court within reach that could declare their fees usurious. When the Templars charged what was, in economic reality, interest, a premium for moving money, a rent, a difference in the exchange rate, the only authority on earth who could object was the Pope. And the Pope was their protector. Every other player in this story had to hide interest inside a loophole and pray no churchman noticed. The Templars had been granted, by Rome itself, a standing exemption from the very authorities that enforced the rule. They didn't need a better loophole. They had been handed a private legal universe. Give an organization vast wealth, a network across every kingdom in Europe, a reputation for absolute honesty and discipline, and then place it beyond the reach of tax collectors, kings, and church courts alike. You have not just built a religious order, you have built the perfect bank. The Templars' first banking innovation grew directly out of their original job, protecting pilgrims. Think about the problem a pilgrim faced. A man in London decides to travel to Jerusalem, a journey of thousands of miles, across seas and through hostile territory, that could take the better part of a year. He needs money the entire way, for food, passage, lodging, bribes, emergencies. But if he carries a year's worth of gold on his body, he is a walking target. Bandits, corrupt officials, shipwreck, simple theft. The odds that he arrives with his purse intact are terrible. This was the exact danger the Templars had been founded to fight, only now it was the pilgrim's money at risk, not just his life. So the Templars built a system to solve it, and in solving it, they invented something close to the modern traveler's check and the letter of credit. Here is how it worked. Before leaving, the pilgrim would walk into a Templar house, a preceptory, in London, and deposit his money there. In return, the Templars gave him a document, a letter, written in a code or a hand the order could verify, recording the value he had deposited. The pilgrim then traveled with almost no coin on him at all, just a piece of parchment that thieves could not spend. When he arrived in the Holy Land, he presented the letter at a Templar preceptory in, say, Acre or Jerusalem, and withdrew the equivalent value in local currency. Read what that requires. It means the Templars maintained houses across the entire known world, hundreds of them, from England and Spain to France, Italy, and the Crusader states, that could all honor each other's paper. It means they kept records reliable enough that a deposit in London could be verified and paid out in Jerusalem months later. It means they moved and balanced money across a continent at war, through territories with different rulers, different currencies, and constant danger. No king in Europe could do that. No merchant house could match it. Only the Templars had the network, the trust, and the discipline to make it work. And of course, it was not free. The Templars took a fee for the deposit, for the exchange of one currency into another, for the risk and cost of maintaining the whole system. Economically, that fee did the same work interest does. The pilgrim received back less than he put in, and the difference was the Templar's profit on his money. But it was never called interest. It was a service charge, a currency exchange, a security fee. And, crucially, per everything we established in Act 2, there was no bishop with the authority to call it anything else. The same order that had been founded to guard pilgrims' bodies now guarded their money and earned a quiet, steady, entirely legal profit doing it. From this one service, the whole architecture of a bank unfolded. If the Templars could safely hold a pilgrim's money, they could hold anyone's. If they could move value from London to Jerusalem, they could move it from Paris to Rome, or from a king's treasury to a battlefield. Deposits, transfers, currency exchange, safekeeping. The Templars were, by the 13th century, offering every core function of a modern bank, and their most important customers were no longer pilgrims. They were crowns. By the middle of the 13th century, the temple in Paris had become something no one in 1119 could have imagined: the financial center of a kingdom. The French crown kept its royal treasury at the Paris temple. Not a metaphor, the actual reserves of the French monarchy were physically stored in the Templars' fortified compound, and the order effectively ran the crown's accounts. Templar brothers served as royal treasurers. They collected revenues, made payments on the king's behalf, kept the ledgers, and advanced money when the treasury ran short. The kings of France, for the better part of a century, banked with warrior monks. And it was not only France. In London, the Temple, the Order's English headquarters, whose round church still stands in the city today, served a similar role for the English crown. Royal treasure was stored there. The kings of England borrowed against it, deposited with it, and used the Templars as trusted keepers of the realm's money and even its crown jewels. Across Europe, the pattern repeated. Where there was a Templar house, there was, in effect, a branch of the most trusted bank on the continent. Why did kings trust an order of monks with the wealth of nations? Because the Templars offered something no rival could. They were disciplined, bound by a strict religious rule. They were honest. Their reputation for keeping accurate accounts was the foundation of their whole business. They were secure. Their preceptories were fortresses defended by trained knights. And they were permanent. An abbey does not flee in the night, and the order had houses everywhere. If you were a king who needed your gold safe, moved, or lent, there was simply no better institution in the world. So the Templars lent. When kings went to war, and in the 13th century they almost always were, they came to the temple for money. When France's King Louis IX led a crusade and was captured in Egypt in 1250, An enormous ransom had to be raised to free him and his men. The Templars' funds in the region were central to covering it, the kind of vast, urgent, cross-border payment that only their network could handle. Kings borrowed for wars, for ransoms, for dowries, for cathedrals. The Templars advanced the money, held the collateral, managed the repayment, and took their fee. But lending to kings was only one line of the business. Look at the full range of what the Paris and London temples actually did, and you are looking at a modern bank's menu of services, 7 centuries early. They took deposits, not just from kings, but from nobles, bishops, merchants, and widows who wanted their wealth somewhere safer than a chest at home. They acted as trustees, holding disputed money in escrow until a quarrel was settled. They safeguarded legal documents and treaties. They collected and forwarded taxes and rents on behalf of clients across borders. And because the Pope himself trusted them above all others, the Church used the Templars to gather crusade taxes from all over Europe and move that money safely to where a campaign needed it, making the order, in effect, the international treasury of the papacy as well as of kings. Think about what that concentration of roles means. The same institution held the treasury of France, banked for the crown of England, safeguarded the wealth of nobles, moved the taxes of the Church, and financed wars on every side. Money from a dozen kingdoms passed through Templar hands, and every transfer, every deposit, every loan carried a fee. The order sworn to poverty had become the clearinghouse of Christendom. Notice what has happened to a group founded on a vow of poverty. As individuals, every Templar still owned nothing. That vow was real, and it held. But as an institution, the order had become the richest and most sophisticated financial network in the Christian world. It held the treasure of France. It banked for the crown of England. It moved money that no sovereign could move alone. It was, in every function that matters, a central bank and an international bank fused into one, 600 years before either of those things officially existed. And there is the danger hidden in that sentence. A bank that lends to kings is only as safe as the kings who owe it. The Templars' greatest strength, that the most powerful men in Europe were their clients, was about to become the thing that destroyed them. Because one of those clients was a king named Philip, and Philip did not intend to pay. Philip IV of France, called Philip the Fair for his looks, not his conduct, was a king with a bottomless need for money and a ruthless willingness to take it from anyone weaker than himself. His reign was one long fiscal emergency. War with England, war in Flanders, an expensive court, and a treasury that was permanently, dangerously empty. Philip had already shown exactly how he solved money problems. He debased the coinage, quietly reducing the precious metal in his coins to stretch the treasury at the cost of his own people's trust. In 1306, he arrested the Jews of France, seized their property and the debts owed to them, and expelled them from the kingdom. He squeezed the Italian bankers, the Lombards, for their assets too. He was, in other words, a king who funded himself by turning on his own creditors. And he owed the Templars an enormous amount. He had borrowed from them heavily. At one point, he had even taken shelter in the Paris temple during a riot. The order's fortress was safer than his own palace. The Templars held the French treasury, knew the true state of the crown's finances, and were owed debts Philip had no way to repay. To a mind like Philip's, the Templars were not a revered holy order. They were the largest creditor he could not intimidate, sitting on wealth he could not tax, protected by a papal exemption he could not override, with one fatal weakness. Everything shielding them ran through the Pope, and Philip, by luck and by pressure, had a pope he could bend. Clement V, a Frenchman, installed at Avignon, dependent on the French crown. So Philip did not sue the Templars. He did not negotiate. He accused them of heresy. At dawn on Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, in a strike planned in total secrecy and executed across the whole of France in a single coordinated morning, Philip's men arrested every Templar they could seize. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was taken. Hundreds of brothers were thrown in chains, and then came the machinery of the charge. The Templars were accused of denying Christ, of blasphemy, of secret obscene rituals, a lurid catalogue of heresies designed to justify seizing the order and its wealth. Under torture, confessions came. Men will confess to almost anything when broken on the rack, and the interrogators knew it. The confessions, many later recanted, became the legal fuel to destroy the order. Philip pressed the Pope relentlessly, and Clement, unable or unwilling to resist the French crown, eventually gave way. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, Pope Clement V formally dissolved the Order of the Temple by the papal bull Vox in Excelso. 2 centuries of history, the richest financial network in Europe, ended not on a battlefield, but by decree. The order's vast properties were ordered transferred, in the main, to the rival Knights Hospitalier, though the French crown made sure to extract its own costs and debts from the wreckage first. And the end was cruel. In 1314, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, was brought out to be sentenced. Expected to confirm his confession one final time, he instead publicly retracted it, declaring the order innocent of the heresies it had died for. For that, he was condemned as a relapsed heretic and burned at the stake on an island in the Seine in Paris. Legend says he called out from the flames, summoning both king and pope to answer before God within the year. Legend or not, both Clement and Philip were dead within months. But strip away the curse and the drama, and the real cause is colder and clearer. The Templars were not destroyed because they were heretics. There is little credible evidence they were anything of the kind. They were destroyed because they were a bank that had grown rich, lending to a king who could not pay, holding wealth he could not otherwise reach, and protected by a legal shield that in the end, a determined king could pry loose by capturing the one man who held it, the Pope. Step back from the fire and look at the whole arc, because it carries the deepest lesson in this series so far. The Templars proved that a bank could be built on trust and network rather than on gold alone. Their real asset was never their treasure. It was the fact that a piece of Templar parchment in London was worth good coin in Jerusalem. That is the essence of all banking that would follow. Not the metal in the vault, but the confidence that the institution will honor its word, anywhere, at any time. The Templars built that confidence at continental scale, and every international bank since has been, in some sense, an imitation of what 9 knights accidentally created. But they also proved something darker, the same lesson we keep meeting in this story. In episodes 1 and 2, the danger to a lender was always doctrine, the Church's ban on usury, and the loopholes needed to survive it. The Templars had beaten doctrine completely. Their papal exemption placed them above the rule that trapped everyone else. And it did not save them, because there is a power older and blunter than doctrine, and that is a sovereign who owes you money and commands an army. The Templars had engineered protection from every church court in Europe. They had no protection from a king willing to call them heretics and a pope too weak to stop him. Their legal shield ran through Rome, and the moment a king could control Rome, the shield became a noose. That is the hard truth the Templars leave us. You can be exempt from the rules. You can be richer than kings, more trusted than governments, protected by the highest authority on earth. But if your protection depends on someone else's power, then your bank is only ever as safe as your most dangerous debtor allows it to be. The first international bank in history was not brought down by a market crash or a rival. It was brought down by a customer. The order that began by sharing a single horse ended as the richest institution in Christendom, and then ended, full stop, because it had lent to the wrong man. Philip the Fair had shown the whole of Europe a lesson that would not be forgotten, that the men who lend to power are never as safe as they believe. But Philip needed a pope to do it, a pope he could control. And that raises the next question in our story. What happens when the man in Rome is not a king's puppet, but the most ruthless financial power of all? What happens when the Pope himself is the one bankrupting kings? That's the next episode in this series, The Pope Who Bankrupted Kings. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and tell me in the comments, were the Templars innocent bankers destroyed by a greedy king? Or did an order of monks with the wealth of nations always have this coming? I want to hear your verdict.